to get in. Thank you very much for being here with us and for attending the tech dives. We will have a series of such tech dives throughout the year. This is the third one in our series, and do get back to us for any further information that you may want from our CTO. And without further ado, I would like to bring to the floor Pierre. Pierre, you're with us, right?
Yes.
Okay, so take a deep dive.
Thank you very much, Vasilia, for the introduction and the nice words. I hope you had all nice days of some time to relax during Easter, and if it's not over, then I wish to enjoy your time off just after this deep dive session. So that's the third deep dive, and this time we are going to talk about the Gaia-X lab and what we are working on in the lab. To do so, I need to explain a bit again Gaia-X, go back to the basics. So we still have this slide that I'm going to use. Gaia-X, again, federating interoperable autonomous ecosystem or data spaces. And we have a strong emphasis right now on to answer the question, what makes my Gaia-X, what makes my services Gaia-X compliant? How do I become Gaia-X compliant? What does it mean to be Gaia-X compliant? And this compliance, it's really the baseline to have this common digital governance that I've presented earlier. So ecosystem, we have that could be one of the Lighthouse project that can be based on blockchain, that can be based not on blockchain, on-prem, on-site, edge, and so on. But what makes them truly interoperable, the first base is to have what we call the trust framework, so this common digital governance. And this is more than words. We want to translate that into actual running code that we are able to, sorry, I'm going to mute some people. I cannot mute people. Okay, please people mute yourself. This common trust framework. So this is really the common set of rules that are mandatory so that ecosystem one, that can be a composition of existing already organization doing business together, being able to easily have the same referential in other ecosystem. Yes. Also, as usual, I'm monitoring the slides, the chat, sorry. So if you have any question, you can ask them in the chat in written form, and I will answer that as I can. So I will share the slides, and by the way, all the slides are always available in the TCP folder under the technical committee. So every member have access to, all of you should have access to those slides. For the curious, you should have even have access to those yesterday. So ecosystems are there, and they represent autonomous set of participants that gather themselves to do business sharing data, sharing services, sharing services in terms of infrastructure, PaaS, SaaS, and so on. The way they are going to do it, that's the technical interoperability. So here we have a user, a federator. Federator is the people or the organization, the participant that really create the common, provide the toolings for operating the ecosystem. And they also manage, for example, the identity, they manage the catalog and so on. But to be Gaia-X compliant, what makes them Gaia-X compliant is really to adhere to this underlying set of rules. And this under set of rules, this architecture by layer, is something that you will find in other cloud reference architecture, such as the one from the NIST. So you have a common digital governance, the ecosystem, and the technical interoperability. This layer here, the trust one, that will be the equivalent of the passport. So if you have a passport, that's this one. If you go to India, for example, you can take your US, French, German passport and go to India. The India government will have an additional layer of governance and require you to have a visa. But they all recognize the same passport, and that's what we mean by a common digital governance. So now back to the lab. Why we are doing that? Because we want to exchange data, we want to exchange the data transaction, services across ecosystem. Well, within ecosystem, organization knows how to do that already. Don't need Gaia-X. The value of Gaia-X is really to bind them together at that level. So more exactly at that level, at the management part. The technical interoperability is something that we will address a bit later, but we need to have the lab will focus now on the data exchange between ecosystem. And why am I mentioning data exchange? Because we have this huge challenge that when we talk about data, usually you have data, AI, value. What it actually looks like when you go deep dive is that you have at least data ingestion, where your data is coming from, how do you explore them, how do you clean your data, how do you normalize your data. You might even compute pre-engineer some feature, data augmentation, generation, and then you train the model with a hyperparameter, with the weight of your neural network, and then you operationalize that. All this pipeline, if this is done within one organization, I would say that's quite already challenging, but doable, and people are already organizations know already how to do that. But let's assume that you are doing that across organizations. So here, the organization doing the selection and the sourcing is different. And the exploration, and here we have as many rows as different organization. And this organization might have different infrastructure layer. So that starts really to be a mesh of organizations that needs to exchange services. And if we zoom to just one of those two columns, selected randomly here, we have at least those 5 pillars: identity and attributes, data protocol, policy negotiation, traceability, and discoverability. We could spend a lot of time doing talking about data exchange. I will talk about what we are going to do for Q2 in the lab. So 2022, and that's something that I will tell again in one slide. We want to demo something for the summit. I'm optimistic, but I'm also realistic. During February, October, usually we don't have the time much. So, and August, July, that's days off. So we need to be done in terms of demo and what we want to achieve by end of June, beginning of July. So we have 3 months left for implementing what I will show. Data exchange, I mentioned 5 pillars. Identity and attributes. We can split them into 2 main categories: access control and usage control. Access control, we know very well how to do that and to technically enforce that. I will call that AC. Usage control, or usage policies that I've used earlier, is mostly done by legal enforcement because we have no mean at the moment to enforce how data will be used after the data has been copied. In the physical world, when you want to share an object, you move the object. In the digital world, when you want to share the object, you copy the object. And once the object is copied, you don't have access to it anymore, and it's gone. And it will be copied over time again and again and again. We might argue that yes, you have trust execution enclave, you have multi-party computation, you have compute to data, you have federated learning, and the last one is fully homomorphic encryption. But those are like very narrow special cases, and the adoption on the market is not there yet. Also, all of the attributes I've mentioned, you need to redo your algorithm. So you cannot take something out of the box or a Jupyter notebook or Spark being a Flink pipeline and just implement it like that. So what we know how to do is the access control, and for the usage, technically speaking, and for the usage control, that's the legal enforcement. So so far we are doing a lot of usage control with legal document, NDA, and so on. Where we want to move is more on the technical side and still probably some lightweight terms and conditions. The second thing was data interoperability. For the one interested, I recommend the book that I'm currently reading about data mesh. And they have really a strong vision about data product. For the one already familiar with data mesh and not about Gaia-X, I hope that's not the situation today. Gaia-X would be like enabling data mesh across organization. The third pillar was policy negotiation, Rigo, ODRL, Lucon. I will give a short example of something I've done yesterday. on what I meant by this policy negotiation and how it relates to the trust framework I presented earlier. Fourth one, we have the traceability. So once you have negotiated your contract, you have the results. Where do you store these results? You can compute a hash of that results. You can sign that with the different parties, and you need to store that. You can store that as either centrally in a database. A Cassandra database can work very well, Postgre also. Distributed, decentralized, doesn't really matter. What matters more is really the feature that those storage will expose. Who controls what, immutability, transport, retention, and so on. And the fifth one is discoverability, and that's related to inter-catalog synchronization. For the one that used to share MP3 during the beginning of this century, you might recognize some of those icons. Basically, we could do the same thing with the self-description of data, not the data themselves, just the metadata of the data describing the data offering. And that together enable data exchange. That's a lot of work, and we won't be able to do everything. So we will focus on the one in bold, the identity and attributes, the policy negotiation, and the traceability for 2022. And by 2022, I need to remind that's June 2022. That's work that we will do in the lab. Now, speaking about the lab, we have GitLab project that is available at the URL I'm mentioning, and there is a wiki. The lab, also, it's important maybe to start with it. It's not a working group. It's really a community of developers that focus on the work I've mentioned earlier. The mission of the lab is to prototype hypotheses made within the working group to validate that the technical specifications worked by the working groups are feasible, operationable. So in the lab, we don't work on specification. The specifications are under the responsibility of the working group. The lab is there to help the working group to make sure that when we make a hypothesis on something that might work, we actually really check that it's working. In terms of deliverable, so I will repeat, but the lab doesn't contribute to Gaia-X specification. The lab doesn't release any official Gaia-X deliverable. There is a small star, and I will comment on that here. Okay, my star is ugly. And the star, that will be two services, the compliance services, version 1, and the registry, version 1. We have a backlog. The backlog is public. You can go and browse the public backlog at this URL and see what we are working on. And we have 3 types of deliverable for the labs. Either we identify a need that a product, a software that we need to have in order to fulfill the work that we want to do for June, and we will call that an accelerator. That's a piece of software that will develop part of the lab, but as soon as we find a placeholder, we contribute it back to the open source project outside of Gaia-X. The goal is not to develop the project inside, it's really to minimize the accountability of the association there. Just an accelerator. So we identify an open source project, we maybe identify a missing feature, then we will push a merge request to implement this missing feature. A filer, that's a bit different. That's when we have a scenario that we want to enable, and there is a missing component, something that doesn't exist, and we need to have it. In that case, we will create a new open source project under the Eclipse Foundation umbrella, part of the GXFS toolbox. And finally, we also have the role of educators. So we will demo how the overall pipeline, for example, data exchange or verifiable controls issuance, Gaia-X compliance will work. The 2 licenses that are used are Apache and EPL. You can contact the lab, contact me, or directly through the repository. The best way is open an issue directly in one of the projects. or a merge request, read the code, and how you can contribute. Well, I'm happy to tell you that we have an open position. So if you are interested by joining the lab, that will be a full-time position as a developer and lead developer for the association. If you are interested, then you can ping me to know more about it or go to the URL there. In terms of planning, so the next slide is fresh out of a session we did 2 weeks ago with the PMO team, so program management team. And there is no fancy animation, so there is a lot of information on it, and I will ask you to try to follow. We started by what do we want to reach? So it starts here. Let me change that just as a highlighter. And we want to, here. We want to work on that part. So the dry run for data exchange for the summit. To do that, I need to have service taxonomy. Nice to have. More importantly, I need to have service taxonomy without attributes, meaning that if I want to do data exchange, I need to be able to express that this is a data that I'm going to exchange. And this is back to the service characteristic working group. There is another dependency here on the identity and access management. If I want to be able to exchange data, I need to be able to compute identity and access management. For doing that, we want to use the cloud wallet, or to be able to expose self-description out there, and to be able to, in the self-description of the data, list rules, or how do I call it, policy rules. So using a domain-specific language to express policy rules. Same thing, if we want to have this common digital governance between ecosystems to exchange data, I need to have a common vocabulary for expressing these access rights, access control. So could be, we could reuse something that exists. So the CRUD, for example, create, update, read, delete. For cloud computing services, we might add others like execute. For data and the access control or usage right control, we might extend that with license terms. So do I have the right to sublicense, to transfer, to modify, to merge sometimes data together? And those are criteria that we need to specify within the self-description. The mandatory, the way we are going to express this vocabulary, it's part of the trust framework. So there is a huge dependency between those three artifacts. The trust framework, which lists the list of mandatory attributes to have. We have the version 1 approved by the compliance working group last week. We should have that approved. I mean, it will go under a vote under the PRC next week. And if everything goes according to the plan, that will be published in mid-May after a BOD final review, Board of Director, Gaia-X Board of Director final review. And this trust framework contains the list of rules that need to be fulfilled when you describe your services. The version 1, don't expect too much. That's just version 1, and we were a bit pressed by the time. So the list of fields that are there is not very long. So to answer the question of Albert earlier in the chat about policy negotiation, traceability are mandatory to be compliant, it will become compliant when you will expose the services that are going to do data exchange. So far, now at that point in time, we don't have specific attributes. But again, this is Trust Framework version 1 or 2204. That will evolve quickly. And it will evolve quickly because we have these new working groups. So I forgot the W. This is Compliance Working Group, Identity and Access Management Working Group, Service Characteristic Working Groups, and Data Exchange Working Group. So we have a new working group under the Federation Services, under the TC, working specifically on the 5 pillars I've mentioned earlier. We're expecting a first drop in the next few months so that we can align on the specification and the way we are going to demo the data exchange. This line, so here you can read that line by line. So here we have the compliance working on the trust framework version 2004 and the 2206. We want to have the terms and conditions added because, as I mentioned earlier, this one will capture the usage control. Part of the compliance working group, we are also implementing the Gaia-X registry. So this service and the compliance. The registry version 1 is already there, and we are working on the compliance version 1 service, online services, to enable the access control that will be this deliverable of the Identity Access Management Working Group, so the AC I've mentioned earlier. I need to have a cloud wallet for that. And now the one of the important project of the lab. It's the name is CALG. The name doesn't mean anything particular. That's just a random name that we generated. And CALG is based on Apache Camel, where we will implement a new Gaia-X component that will capture the subscription coming from validated by the trust framework and will contain attributes that we can compute policy on. So now I need to jump and start to show a bit how it will look like with the different pieces put together. So trust framework, that's the list of rules that you need to fulfill when you are, for example, a participant. A participant will say that you have a registration number, headquarter, country, legal address, country. And what you can do when part of your services now, so if you have a data service, it's when you have a data service to express policies, part of the subscription. And these policies will be described using a domain-specific language, such as Rego or GRL, which are the two languages that we are investigating right now. I have a favor for Rego because that's an extension of Datalog that supports JSON. And since we are using solution based on JSON LD, in Rego, we can directly parse JSON LD, Gaia-X description. The example I'm going to give is from the Rego platform directly. So here we have, for example, a Gaia-X participant description. The same thing I've mentioned earlier. You see headquarter, country, the legal address, and the registration number. We have some generic data about what is the European Economic Area for Austria and Belgium and so on. And we have here a policy. A policy is something that is expressed by the data owner. So this is coming from the data owner. This is coming from the data consumer. This is generic data. And the data data owner says that I will allow only participant in EEA. What does it mean, EEA? That the legal address country is part of this array. I can go. I don't think that's a proper time to do Rego courses, but that's allow me to go through the entire array. And when I will evaluate, it will see that yes, participant is really in EEA. If I change that as something that is Turkey, then Turkey is not that. I think it's TR. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Then it's false. The next step now is to take these results that has been evaluated and to store that into what I've mentioned in terms of traceability and traceability into database. And that database, it's really the implementation depends on the ecosystem. We will, in part of the lab, we will start with something really simple in a central database. That's for the demo. I have a question from Wanro in the chat about the access control policy definition language. No, there has been no adoption yet. And this particular topic of vocabulary for the access control will be addressed inside the Identity and Access Management Working Group. So that's this box, access right vocabulary. And I will invite you to join the Identity and Access Management Working Group to work on that topic. This is a very important one, and we need that if we want to have, again, this ability to compute access control across ecosystem. We need to have a common vocabulary. The calc project is being worked on in the lab. So GitLab, Gaia-X, lab, calc. You have a repository. There is an active contributor, which is Jean-Baptiste from the Apache Foundation. And there is a small description of how it will work. We plan to accelerate on it significantly in the next few weeks. We also have part of this acceleration. We have a new joiner within the association. Her name is Christina, and she will be the project manager for the open source community. So handling the backlog of the labs, but also the GXFS project. And that will speed up significantly our progress there. That will be all for presentation of the lab. The main takeaway, if that was a bit unstructured for you, it's we have the trust framework document, which is very important, that is being developed, operationalized using two services, the registry and the compliance. And by registry and compliance by services, I mean that you will have here registry.gaia.eu, compliance.gaia.eu as web services running and that you can use through an API. Another set, so that's the first block. The second block, that will be all the vocabulary that are required to express rules, so the access rights, and being able to say that you are exchanging data. And the fourth and the third one, that will be the specification for data exchange and the implementation using the CAL project part of the lab. I'm inviting everyone with Apache Camel experience or Java development experience background to join the lab and help us to make that reality for a dry run end of June, so that can be presented in the Gaia-X Summit. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm staying there available if you have any question.
Thank you very much, Pierre. I think this is the moment to ask any questions, either through our chat, our forum here, or simply raising your hand or your virtual hand to, in fact, ask any questions that you may have directly to Pierre. We have some questions on the chat.
So the Apache Camel one, unfortunately, I don't have a new presentation, but I will use the one that I created a few months ago. So it will be it will not be as nice as those ones, but it will probably bring clarity. We have part of Camel allows you, let me clean that a bit so first, sorry. Camel allows you to express rules using a language. So from, for example, HTTPS and the source with some query parameter, wiretap, that will be the equivalent of the clearinghouse. So basically you log the transaction and what's happening. Choice, that's to do some filtering or like railroad aiguillage selection. And the two for the bucket of where you want to send that. Here, the important part is that we are going to develop a Gaia-X component part of the Apache Camel. This Gaia-X component, which is there, is going to intercept the URL and the query parameter that are going there. So here we are going to have also self-description of if this is a a piece of code run by Bob. The subscriptions, Bob's subscription, basically. Subscription of Bob. And the component will take then the subscription of Bob using the same rules that I've mentioned earlier in the GWT token, the payload. The payload will contain the policy rules, the same thing I've mentioned earlier. So a set of data, input, and rules, and we'll be able to compute results. And this result will be either, well, continue or stop. And if it's continue, then the JS component is just going to decapsulate the rest of the string that it received and pass it through the pipeline. So we don't have part of this Apache Camel to implement every endpoint. We lean on that. We just implement a Gaia-X component that intercept the subscription and is able to compute rules out of it. We selected Apache Camel because there is a lot of data and point support. It's part of the Apache foundation, so you have the entire ecosystem of Hadoop around it. That expose a lot of gateway and endpoint supports for various data storage. And also it's open source and in Java, so that's it's not easy, but we can find expertise on there. There is a question in the chat about the cloud wallet. We are using part of the lab, the Vault ID cloud wallet, so that's a SSI kit for a cloud wallet. There are a lot of still ongoing work that is being done, especially on the traceability or the chain of keys used to sign a subscription. A question of how to be a trust anchor in Gaia-X registry. You don't decide to be a Gaia-X description that trust anchor. That will be a job of the association and the working group compliance to list and to elect trust anchors. So the list of approved trust anchor there so far is in the Trust Framework document version 2204. And we have the following one. So to be Gaia-X compliant, you will have to take the small JSON file and JSON information and to put that inside the verifiable credentials and to sign that with a key coming from, if you are, for example, in EA, an IDaaS provider, an IDaaS qualified electronic certificate. And the list of IDaaS one are listed there. So it means that we are deciding as part of the association what makes a trust anchor, a Gaia-X one. And we put all the keys of Gaia-X trust anchor inside the registry. And the registry is already up and running, and you can find it here. I think that Kai already put a link in the chat. Yes. Same thing, the registry, the source code behind that, it's part of the lab. So if you go to GitLab and to the Gaia-X lab, you will find the registry implementation. Here. No, we are not going to. So question to Arnaud, do we mean that we are going to define protocol for data exchange? Not at that point in time. The data exchange protocol part is out of scope for Q2. We have that part of the plan, but this is, we won't have time to focus on that so far. So this is part of this data interoperability or data, protocols. The API, the exact way how to do that, it's out of scope for now. I know this is expected. Quite honestly, We already have association in Europe that try to do that for decades with limited success, let's say. So we are not going to start with that. We are going to start with what we consider brings most value for Gaia-X, so that everything that touch on this common digital governance. So the identity, the attributes, how do you negotiate policies? And for data interoperability, for the how to express data semantics, how to connect that together, how to have really this data exchange in terms of REST API, from the MQTT to HDFS to stream to a batch and so on. That will be, I guess we'll have to find a way to express that, but later.
But sorry if I jumped. It's wonderful, but to be a bit more agile. But then this Apache Camel exchange would be used only for processing JSON Web Tokens. Is as part of the, let's say, implementation of I don't know, access control, or still it's a bit unclear to me what is going to be used for.
So the Apache Camel is a demo. So the lab project Apache Camel or CALG fall under the category of the demo for the lab. It's not meant to be Apache Camel will be used to be Gaia-X compliant. That's not at all that. The point here is to show that we can do data exchange with computation of policies based on Gaia-X self-description, based on Gaia-X compliant self-description. And for that, we need a framework. Instead of doing everything from scratch, we decided to lean on Apache Camel because that's what provided the best ratio in terms of support, maturity of the component, and the ease to integrate our own need there. If I need to rephrase myself, an ecosystem that don't want to use Apache Camel can be also Gaia-X compliant. It's just that for the demo, we want to show how from I'm issuing a Gaia-X subscription to I'm able to share data, going through the entire pipeline of I'm negotiating the access rights can be done.
Okay.
Any further questions that we would like to position to our CTO?
Then I wish you, thank you very much. If no further question, you can always reach out to me anytime. I strongly encourage you to join the data exchange working group and the identity and access management working group, where we define the vocabulary for enabling that. And if you are interested by more what makes Gaia-X compliant, then the compliance working group. We need to have technical expert there also on the data exchange for the compliance.
Thank you very much, Pierre. This was quite analytical, I would say, even despite that it's quite technical in nature. I would like to simply inform on the next tech dive that will take place on the 25th of May, same time at 12 o'clock, and that we would like to have you there, all our members, interested developers and parties that would in fact wish to join us, they would be more welcome to do so. We will be able to elaborate further on the data exchange services at that time. Thank you very much for your time, your participation, your active engagement, and see you very soon. Have a good day.